Hey, Clemson family, let's take a look at Clemson's place in the ACC with guest David Hale of ESPN and ACC Network. He's here to talk about how a difficult 2021 changes the Tigers' preseason outlook this year.
I'm Daniel Shirley. David also broke down the offense and defense for us and took a look ahead at the Tigers' early season schedule.
I'm Bill Zimmerman. Welcome to episode 19 of the Reign Supreme Alway podcast. Go ahead and tap that subscribe button or follow us so you can keep up with the latest big happenings in Clemson sports. We'll have plenty of analysis for you as things happen, especially as the season is almost here. You can find our homepage at clemsonkickoff.com. We're on all the major podcast apps if you just search Clemson and scroll just a little bit. We're on Twitter at Clemson Kickoff, where we keep you posted as big news breaks. And we upload our audio to youtube.com/Clemson Kickoff. Wherever you listen, we are glad you found us. We're joined now by a guest who covers the ACC quite a bit for ESPN. He's in his 10th anniversary of covering the ACC in one way or another, David Hale. David, thanks for making time for us.
I am happy to do it. For you guys, I would do anything.
Fabulous.
Well, within reason.
Lucky to have you here, able to kind of put Clemson in context of the ACC. Daniel and I have broken down a lot about the team, the opponents, the positions, but we haven't really had a chance to go and say, all right, well, here's sort of their general place as the fall camps wrap up and starting the season off. So what's your perspective on that?
It's a fascinating year because over the last, really better part of a decade, we have talked about the ACC being FSU or Clemson. And certainly over the last 5 years, FSU has removed itself from that conversation, which has left the conversation about the ACC to be extensively Clemson. I don't know that that's the case this year, and I think that there's a lot of reasons for that. Number one is certainly not that Clemson had a bad year last year, but they didn't play in an ACC championship game, which is a story in and of itself. And I don't know how dramatically better you should feel like things are going to be this year, particularly on the offensive side of the ball. Can be, a lot of room for growth, but there's clearly a window there. And you look at it at the same time and you say a team like NC State, which beat Clemson last year, finished the year strong, returns a ton of talent, has an opportunity to move up. You look at a team like Miami that went out and remade its entire staff and culture and has an opportunity to be a lot better. Pittsburgh won the league last year and certainly should not be discounted again this time. Wake Forest, I think a lot depends on when we see Sam Hartman back on the field, but that's the team that won the Atlantic last year. I think they deserve some credit coming into this year. Maybe we'll certainly see what happens this week one against LSU, but maybe FSU is ready to be part of that conversation again. I don't know. If you're smart and you're putting your money on a team, that team should still be Clemson. Of course, they're the most talented team in the league, but there is a different sort of landscape than we've had for a lot of years, where it does feel like maybe not strong odds, but there's not a 0% chance that Clemson really takes a step back. And look, the history is certainly not there for NC State. We've talked about Miami being back a million times when they haven't. I don't know that you should buy into any of those narratives either. But again, it's not a 0% chance. So I think that it's a weird dynamic this year in that the smart money says that this year will probably look a lot like every other year. But there is a stronger case to be made for things to look different this year, for Clemson not to be at the top of the totem pole than there had been in a long time.
David, you watched this team a lot for a decade, like you said. What went wrong last year offensively? It seems like almost everything went wrong.
Right. Yeah, it's hard to point to one thing. And of course, the one thing that everybody did point to, because it was the most obvious, was DJ Uyunglele and the lack of QB performance. And that's a justified criticism. He was bad last year. There's no way around the reality that he missed a lot of throws, that he did not execute the RPO very well, that he did not come up big in big moments, and that he made some throws that cost them some games. All of that is true. But you look at the surrounding context, and look, frankly, some of the criticism of Tony Elliott last year and the play calling was justified. They really didn't get out of their comfort zone, even when it was quite clear that what they were doing wasn't working. You can look at the recruiting and development on both the O-line and the receiving core, which has been a problem for a while. It was a problem while Trevor and Travis were there. And I think it was a problem that really came to a head last year because you didn't have elite level talent like Trevor and Travis to overcome that, but also just because it all sort of reached its nadir at the same point. And the mix of injuries and inconsistency at the receiving core was just such a huge problem that even if DJ had not struggled in his own right, I think it would have been a real challenge to move the ball. I mean, this was a problem in 2022, in 2020, two, because Trevor Lawrence, as good as he was, really did not have a reliable downfield threat the entire season either. What really was the foundation of what Clemson could do offensively was the backfield, which I think is going to be very, very good. And they've got three guys that I think would start for almost anybody in the ACC. But that unit didn't really coalesce and develop and get healthy at the same time until the end of the year either. And that's when you saw Clemson playing its best ball. So I think if you're looking for room for encouragement, a reason for encouragement, that's it. But the flip side of that is, Dabo refuses to go into the transfer portal, and that's his prerogative. But even he was open to going and getting an O-lineman, and they didn't. They didn't go out and sign a veteran game-breaking wide receiver that could kind of complement that mix that they already have in there. And yes, you hope Bo Collins or Dakari Collins is better this year with a year of experience under their belt, and you hope Joe Ngata stays healthy and can be more consistent and all of those things. But frankly, I don't know that there's any reason to assume that this receiving core is going to be markedly better than it was last year. And I think that's probably true of the offensive line too. So I think some of the concerns about last year are not exactly absolved this year just because everybody's got a year under their belt and people assume that it's Clemson, so it'll get fixed. I mean, it really, from a roster management standpoint, doesn't look markedly different than it did a year ago.
David, you mentioned the offensive line. I think all problems on offenses start on the offensive line.
Yeah.
So are they better offensively up front than they were last year?
I don't know. I mean, look, Robbie Caldwell took the blame for a good bit of that, and maybe that's justified. I mean, I would argue that even in the elite years of Clemson winning a national championship, the O-line was never their strength. It was a unit that could go up and keep them in games when they had a dynamic quarterback like Deshaun Watson or Trevor Lawrence, but it wasn't a strength. What you saw was an absolute anchor on the team last year. Again, you'd say, I hope some of these guys are better having gone through that experience, that adversity makes you stronger. I think there's a good case for that. Again, it's Clemson, so they're still recruiting good talent. Obviously, there's a new coaching staff there, too. How much does that change things? I mean, at the end of the day, a lot of what the O-line is doing is about what you want your scheme to be. And so I almost look less at saying, well, you've got a new O-line coach and maybe the system's a little bit different. Then you look at the new play calling with Brandon Streeter, and you say, will that help remove some of the difficulties or cover some of the weaknesses that the O-line had? Because for the most part, you're running out more or less the same guys you were running out there last year. You're just hoping they're playing better. And I don't know. I mean, that's why I say that I think this is a genuine question mark, because you think that it should be better. It should, because you've looked at past history. But I don't know what the actual evidence is to suggest it will beyond it's Clemson. Of course, they're not going to be bad 2 years in a row.
What about defensively? I mean, they were so good under Brent Venables, and now he's gone, and we know that. They've got so much talent. What do you expect out of this unit this year, even with a new coaching staff and a new leader of that group?
Yeah, I would be a little bit surprised if they're anything other than elite because, as you mentioned, I mean, the amount of sheer NFL caliber talent on this defensive depth chart is off the charts. It's so good. They've got, I think, arguably one of the best linebackers in the country in Trenton Simpson, who is not, I think, as widely known as he probably should be. Andrew Makuba was kind of thrown into the fire last year and really blossomed really, really nicely as the year went along. You hear the reports on Nate Wiggins and how good he has been in both the spring and fall camp. And, of course, you have that defensive line, which is too deep with NFL talent. I can't imagine a scenario in which the defense really takes a step back. And I think X's and O's wise, Wes Goodwin and what they want to do defensively is probably right on target with what Brent Venables was, because Wes Goodwin learned under Brent Venables. He was sort of a right-hand man. I think the bigger picture questions on Clemson's defense and losing Brent Venables is about what happens next year and the year after that and the year after that, because what is harder, I think, to maintain is the energy, the culture, the passion, the personality, the relentlessness, all of these things that Brent Venables had that I don't know how many other defensive coaches in the country you can put out there that, I mean, even if you go out and and hire whatever the next best defensive coordinator in the country, and you go out and hire him. I don't know if that's Brent Venables. He is elite as it comes to people who have coached that side of the ball. So I think I'm more concerned long-term when it has to be more of Wes Goodwin's defense and how they're going to evolve from here. I think this year, I hate to say that it's sort of plug and play with any coaching staff. It's not that simple, but the pieces are already there. You kind of have to work to screw that up.
Does it feel like they're more athletic on the back end than they've been? I mean, especially at linebacker.
Yeah, and that's, to me, one of the big areas where I think it matters a lot. And if you look, I think the best linebacking crew they've had is probably the 2019 team, and this unit is probably closer to that. I mean, they have been, just athletically speaking, I mean, Brent Venables always would prefer a tough-as-nails linebacking crew as opposed to the, most, finesse, pretty, look good in the uniform type of guys. I think he likes the guys who reminded him of him, that just want to go out and rip somebody's head off. And they've had their share of those guys that are really good. I think this feels like probably a better combination of all of those things. One guy I will be very interested in seeing how he develops this year is Jeremiah Trotter Jr., who, again, the reports out of fall camp have been really, really positive and encouraging. I don't know if they need him necessarily to blossom into this superstar this year, but I think you look at what they have in the depth chart and you say, well, if he becomes what sort of five-star prospect that many people projected him to be coming out of high school, that unit could be just astoundingly good.
You mentioned Wes Goodwin, but they bring in Nick Eason as the defensive line coach, and we've kind of seen what he's meant already in recruiting. What do you expect out of him, a guy that has a lot of NFL experience?
Right. I mean, to me, this is sort of a linchpin hire because I hesitate to even sort of offer too much in terms of judgment of Wes Goodwin because I don't know him well. We've only had a handful of interactions since he got hired. But, he is not the Brent Venables personality, right? He is not the guy that is just oozing energy and passion and it just, Brent's one of those guys that you could talk to him about his Burger King order and you'd be ready to go run through a wall afterwards. I don't know that Wes Goodwin is that. And so what you need to do is find a way to sort of supplement those parts that, again, you don't replace Brent Venables. But what you can do is replace some of those qualities. And that's where I think that hire matters. They already recruit. They can largely call themselves D-line U based on what they have been over the last decade. And that will help recruit itself. But when you've got a guy that helps sort of replace some of that Venables energy and you have invested in showing this position group is still a thing that is going to be the foundation of what we do defensively. And you're not going to go anywhere in the country and get better coaching to play at this position than you are at Clemson. It's a little bit of a statement, I think, to say you're not just because this guy who's been developing great D linemen under his watch for the last decade is gone, doesn't mean that's not still going to happen. I think that was a critical hire in sort of establishing that this wasn't just going to be the sort of Xerox copy of Brent Venables' defense, that this was going to be a new way of putting the whole together by creating individual parts that work well together.
Do you feel like maybe this new staff has kind of re-energized Dabo, and maybe this gives them a rebirth, I guess, after a quote-unquote bad year?
I think this is one of the biggest questions to be answered by this season, the most interesting scenarios, both in the ACC and maybe nationally. Because, look, let's take a step back and just sort of compare and contrast Clemson with other elite schools like Ohio State or Alabama. Ohio State had a rough year defensively last year. Not a train wreck of a year, but a rough year. And what did Ryan Day do but go out and get the absolute best defensive coordinator on the market that he could find in Jim Knowles, paid him a ton of money, and said, come in and fix this. Alabama, we've seen Nick Saban cycle through assistant coaches again and again and again. And not only does he replace really good coaches with more really good coaches, but he brings in support staff that is guys who have coached in the NFL. I mean, it's insane what he does. And he is constantly bringing in outside ideas. And I think no better example of that than his willingness to turn to Lane Kiffin on the offense at the time that he did and really transform philosophically how he wanted to approach winning football games. That's a credit to Nick Saban. Dabo is dug in on being Dabo, and we're going to hire the guys that I know and the guys that I like and the guys that are going to do it the Clemson way. And the Clemson way is the only way we're going to do it here. And I don't need a bunch of new ideas. We're not reinventing the wheel. He may well be right about that. I mean, I would argue that approach and that insistence on doing things that way in the way of the way that he has prioritized culture over all else for the entirety of his time at Clemson is the reason that Clemson is as good as it is. So I don't think you can fairly question that decision. But Dabo has put his stamp on this offseason as saying, I'm riding with the guys I got. I'm dancing with the girl I brought. Like, this is who we are and what we're going to do. I am not going outside the box. I am not going to go find the biggest name. I am not hiring a resume. I am hiring people. And more than that, I am hiring people that I know. And that trickles down into the way he has built out the roster and refusing to go into the transfer portal too. He is sticking with the guys he knows. And again, you look at history and you say, Dabo's done a darn good job of that. I can't criticize it. I can't say he's wrong because he's been right again and again and again. But he has stuck his neck out here. And if they do take a step back, if that offense doesn't improve, if the defense isn't what we think it is, there are going to be people who question this. And so to me, I've always wondered, and particularly as last year went along, like maybe they do need to shake things up a little bit. Just because you did things this way and it worked for a few years doesn't mean that that continues to go about it, because there's a bunch of other teams out there coming at you and trying to figure out a way to stop it. I think Dabo is always going to be Dabo. I mean, authenticity is the thing that he's going to build around. Like, he has to be him. So I don't blame him for the way he's done it. But I think it is definitely like he has crawled out on a branch pretty far to say, this is how we're going to do it. We're going to do it our way, despite a lot of folks and even Clemson fans that sort of scratched their heads and said, is this the best possible way? I am fascinated to see how this evolves this year. And I'm fascinated to see what happens once, if they do lose a game early or things don't look markedly better, because there's a lot of people, I think, waiting to pounce on Dabo right now, fairly or not. And it will be very interesting to see if this plan doesn't look great right away, how Clemson and Dabo in particular handle that.
What do you expect out of Georgia Tech?
I think this is a pretty bad football team, quite honestly. You look back at the Georgia Tech game last year, and it wasn't like Clemson blew the doors off of them. That was I never felt like that was a game that Clemson wasn't in control of last year, but it was certainly not a game where Clemson played even close to good football, and they let Georgia Tech hang around. Now, I don't think that this year's Georgia Tech team was probably as good as that one was. They have lost their absolute best player in Jahmyr Gibbs, who went to Alabama, and I think is going to be an absolute superstar this year. We're seeing year 3 of the Jeff Sims ride, and I don't know how excited you should be to watch that again. Like, he's not shown market development. They've got some transfers that they've brought in to fill out some key needs, particularly the line of scrimmage. But it's not, again, we're not talking about like Jamison Williams type of transfers. We're not talking about Jahmyr Gibbs type of transfers. These are largely guys who didn't play much in the places they were before. So what are you really getting? Is it guys who sort of fell down to you because they couldn't succeed somewhere else? Or is it guys who just needed a change of pace and are about ready to flourish in a new environment? Because those things happen too. I mean, you look at Jermaine Johnson at Florida State last year, was a perfect example of that. But I just look at this Georgia Tech roster and A, I wonder how the heck they move the ball against this Clemson defense. And B, I think if Clemson is even a speck better at the line of scrimmage on offense and can run the ball with those 3 guys in the backfield the way that they want to run the ball, I just do not see a path for Georgia Tech to win this football game. Now, the bigger question, I think, for a lot of Clemson fans would probably be, how much do they win the football game by, and how easy do they make it look? Because if we're looking at another sort of 20-14 type of game, I don't know you can come away with the win, and I don't know if anybody's going to be throwing a party about it. But if they go out there, I think they're favored by 23 or something like that. If they go out there and win by 3 touchdowns, I think everybody can say, all right, we don't necessarily know where the season's going to go, but we're tracking along with what our expectations should be.
So does that make the NC State game really the first one to worry about? Obviously, we don't know if Sam Hartman will be back week 4 for Wake Forest or not, but you look at Devin Leary and it's kind of the opposite. He's kind of like Fresh Prince looking around the living room and going, where's Econru? Where's my receiving core? Where are my running backs? What happened here? So a lot of changes there too, but Dave Doran always has them tough, always has them focused for that game, gets them up for that game. Is that the one to really think, all right, here's where Clemson maybe needs to open the basket a little bit and do a few more things?
Well, it is interesting. You're going to see, after this Georgia Tech game, which again, they're favored by 3 touchdowns, will be a huge favorite against Furman, a huge favorite against La Tech. So you got Wake Forest, and again, as you point out, a lot of that depends on whether Sam Hartman's back or not. But even as good as Wake was last year, as talented as Sam Hartman was, Wake looked overwhelmed against Clemson last year. I don't know that I'd choose. I would kind of circle that as a huge test either in some respects, and without question, Clemson is far more talented than Wake Forest. So, yeah, I think you get to the NC State game and you say that's the sort of tell. That's the one that will learn something for real about Clemson. And, people forget, as bad as Clemson performed at times last year, particularly the first half of the season, that was still a double overtime game. Like, NC State didn't go out there and whip Clemson by any stretch of the imagination. So you got an NC State team last year that was probably playing close to its ceiling, and a Clemson team that was probably playing as close as it could be to its floor, and that was still a double OT game. So I think NC State's going to be a pretty good team this year. Defensively, they're real good. They're real good. And I think if you didn't have Clemson in this league, people would be hyping the NC State defense even more. I need to see an NC State team that can sort of do what Clemson found a way to do at the end of last year, which is play some power football, have running backs that you can build around, that can take some of the pressure off the receiving core and sort of dictate the terms in which you're playing at the line of scrimmage on offense. They just weren't that team last year. And they were able to win games because Devin Leary is just a hell of a good quarterback. But to your point, I think he loses his security blanket in Emeka Emezi at receiver. And they had two really good running backs last year. They just didn't run the ball well. So they're, I think, worse at running back this year probably. It's just a question of whether or not they can make any holes for those guys. We're going to get some better tests for NC State before that October 1st game against Clemson too. NC State's got, heck, this isn't exactly a pushover that they've got in week 1 at ECU. So I think we'll have a better feel of exactly who NC State is by the time these two teams get together. Whereas with Clemson, they've got a little runway here where those first 4 games, there should be enough margin for error for them to figure out any problems that may arise, for them to make some tweaks. But you're right. This game, I don't know that it has the cachet of like what FSU Clemson had for a long time in like 2012, 13, 14, 15. But it is sort of the best of what the ACC has to offer right now. And I think for pretty good reason.
If nothing else, we can count the number of laptops on the sideline and look for stolen towels disappearing and that kind of stuff, right? So
that's what makes the whole game great, right? Like the anger shared sort of ironically, but maybe not, is just great between those two teams. I want that to happen. I want more of that.
Well, tell us a little bit about your new show that you've got on ACC Network. You and Andrea Adelson, two really fixtures of the ACC football beat. I'm real excited to see the show.
Yeah, so what ACC Network, I think one of the things that they're really trying to do this year is give football fans more football, which is great. In addition to moving Mark Packer's show to 4 o'clock from the morning, so his show, along with Taylor Tannenbaum and Trey Boston, airs at 4 every day during the week. And there will be a lead-in show at 3 that will air Monday through Friday. And there's different hosts each of those days. So me and Andrea are doing the Thursday show. What that will mean, I wish I could tell you. I'm not any good at being on TV. Andrea, as always, will carry me, hopefully. But it'll be different. We're going to try to be, a little more outside the box in how we want to preview some of these games. It won't be probably a ton of X's and O's, but we will try to provide as much behind-the-scenes info from our reporting as we can, and hopefully have a lot of fun with it. And at the very least, it will probably be a total train wreck because I'm an idiot and we're doing a show live. So what could possibly go wrong?
There's a reason Daniel and I aren't doing the show live, but you've got the details on teams. Some of the discussion earlier, like it's not just the surface level stuff that we get from national people. You actually go into the reasons why those conversations are happening kind of on a surface level elsewhere. And so I'm really excited to hear you guys talking once a week, and also the rotation that's going to be in that show sounds really good. So appreciate you joining us. What else is going on for you?
Oh, not a lot. I got a kid starting kindergarten, so I'm like, on one hand, I'm looking at this weekend as being like, oh, football season's about to start, life's going to get busy. And then I'm like, no, I've got a small child starting kindergarten, and the world's about to change for me forever. So I'm an emotional train wreck right now. That's essentially what's happening.
Aren't we all? Listen, we appreciate your time. Appreciate you chatting with us. Always good to catch up with you, David Hale of ESPN. Thanks a lot.
Hey, my pleasure, guys. Thanks for having me.
Thanks, bud.
Yep.
Be sure to subscribe to us on youtube.com/Clemson Kickoff for all the latest updates. Well, on Clemson's long ago football field, there was some huge excitement the other night with the Tigers soccer team. The men defending their national championship got off to a great start against Indiana, didn't they?
They did. It was a fun game to watch. What a crowd over at Riggs Field, and it was just exciting. Just watching it on TV, you could just see the excitement. You know, they had they hung the banner, they raised the banner for last year's championship, and then to play that kind of program in the opener is special. I mean, Indiana, they said it on the broadcast, is probably the great soccer program in the country's history. And Clemson is right up there. Clemson has a great program, two historic programs starting the season together, and the game lived up to it. I mean, Indiana gets off to the early start with kind of a fluke goal a little bit. Clemson responds and takes the lead, and then Indiana gets the goal back on the PK to tie it. And then Clemson with the late goal. Just, I mean, the stadium was rocking. It was a lot of fun, and what a great way to get the season started. And we'll see what the Tigers can do the rest of this year. This is a really fun team to watch, Bill, even for a soccer neophyte that I am. It's fun, it's exciting, energetic, attacking. I love the group that Coach Noonan and his staff have put together and the style of play that they have for this year's team.
They are fun to watch. I had some other obligations Friday night, wasn't able to check out that game. I had Twitter going on just to keep up with the goals and watch the highlights as I could here and there. But I do love watching this men's team. And the Tigers last night posted a 2-0 win over USC Upstate thanks to a goal from Isaiah Reed. Good to see him get on the board as a team captain this year, who recently said on a Clemson Plus feature that he's been a Tigers fan since age 9. Also a goal from Tim Strobeck, and big game coming up Friday against arch rival South Carolina. And the women's team off to a good start too, also ranked.
Yeah, they're ranked as well. Tough loss last night to Alabama, but Alabama's a good team. We know that. They beat Clemson in the tournament last year. So the Tigers didn't get their revenge, but going to Alabama is a tough one, and they got their first loss of the year, but we'll see how they can bounce back. But Clemson's not just a football school, it's a football school, right? That's what people say. So it's going to be a fun year, and hopefully, they said last year Clemson's the only school in the country with 3 football championships and 3 soccer championships. Hopefully we can hopefully the school will have 4 of each of those later on this year.
We love keeping up with all the sports as needed, and if any news breaks around campus in the next few days, we'll react to that as well. We'll discuss what it means for the Tigers, whatever sport they're playing. Daniel, though, I'll tell you what, is football game week. We are here, and I know there's going to be a lot to keep an eye on leading up to kickoff in Atlanta.
I can't wait, Bill. The season's less than a week away. We know next Monday night in Atlanta, the Tigers will kick it off against Georgia Tech. David talked about last year's Georgia Tech game and how close it was. And that's that game, remember, that the lightning delay, and I was at that game, and you had to sit in that lightning delay and wait for the game to get started. And it was a weird game. It was like David said, never really in doubt as far as Clemson losing control, but they just couldn't put Georgia Tech away. So I'm really excited to see what this Clemson team looks like. It's a conference game to open the year, so that adds even more importance to it. So it's a big one coming up, and can't wait to hear what the players talk about this week as they get ready for that opener.
Well, everybody go get your blood pressure meds refilled before kickoff. I think it's going to be another fun one. I think there's going to be a lot of drama week to week. Certain weeks, you might have some blowouts, but some of the storylines to watch are always going to be interesting with personnel for the Tigers. How is the depth chart looking? How are guys performing? Do they look against lower competition like they're in that form that's going to be able to take the team all the way to the playoff and win against top competition, such as NC State, such as Notre Dame, such as I think Miami will be, and then whoever you get in the ACC championship game if you're able to qualify there. So we'll be keeping an eye on all those developments and breaking it down all season long for you. Plan to keep coming to you twice a week with analysis of the games and then analysis before kickoff of each opponent as well. I hope everyone has enjoyed this, and we are glad you found us, Clemson family. Go ahead and smash that subscribe button or that follow button. You can stay up to speed every time we've got analysis of the big news that's happening around campus. We want to be able to keep this a free podcast, so stay in touch with us best you can. Comment, like, subscribe, and stay in touch with us. Our homepage has some great resources, and we're working on it every week a little bit. Easy to read schedule on there with kickoff times as they're announced. Be sure to check that out at clemsonkickoff.com. You can also play all our episodes and our shorts there. You can go back and check out the analysis of opponents game by game. You can check out our analysis of positions around the roster and the depth chart. Plus, we've got links to all the popular podcast apps as well. You can follow us on Twitter at Clemson Kickoff, where we retweet news as it happens and we give quick hit opinions in real time. Until the next episode, I'm Bill Zimmerman.
I'm Daniel Shirley. Go Tigers. I'm David. Am I David?